Hi again, and thanks so much for joining me for this video on organizational behavior. It's great to have you here, and I'm glad you're interested in public service. Today we have 3 goals for this video. I want to introduce you to the concept of new public service. We'll define ethics and explore key principles of ethical behavior in the public sector. And finally, the video will mention the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion for those leading and managing public organizations. First, I want to spend a little bit of time on the concept of new public service. There's been a movement in public administration towards what is known as new public management. This concept's been espoused by Osborne, Gabler, and others. It implies that government should be reinvented and that public organizations should be run like businesses. The assertion is that hierarchical controls and bureaucratic processes should be abandoned and that there must be more emphasis on privatization, entrepreneurialism, revenue generation, and accountability. I understand those concerns and recommendations if we consider the fact that the government is now over $31 trillion in debt. It's clear that there should be more emphasis on efficiency. At the same time, Denhart and his colleagues have noted in their important book that the leaders and managers of public and nonprofit organizations should understand that they operate in a setting of democratic governance. Let me share some of those principles with you. The first principle of new public service is to serve rather than steer. This suggests that leaders and managers in the public sector should not just make decisions for the public. They must foster participation, facilitate dialogue, and negotiate conflict in order to help people in the community or society find solutions to public problems. The second principle of new public service is to focus on the shared notion of the public interest. The goal is not to just focus on individual preferences, but create a vision based on shared values for the future, which should include justice, fairness, and equity. I'll come back to these concepts at the end of the video. A third principle advocates that public servants must think strategically and act democratically. Public servants should not act alone to set priorities for the future. Everyone in the community must participate in setting the agenda, and the government must be open, accessible, and responsive to citizens. Next, Denhart and his colleagues assert that public servants must see those in the community as citizens and not just customers. What this means is that government should not just focus on the selfish short-term objectives of taxpayers. Government should foster citizenship, be sensitive to stakeholder voices, and focus on the public good. Another principle is accountability. Denhart and his colleagues declare that public servants may need to focus on the market or the budget. However, they also recommend that leaders and managers in the public sector must also follow law, values, norms, and professional standards of conduct. A sixth principle is to concentrate on people. What is being suggested here is that there can be too much emphasis on scientific management or public management. Public leaders and managers should promote higher values, respect, accommodation, and support of the individual members of society. The final principle is to value public service and not just innovation and effectiveness. The goal is not to maximize productivity, but to serve citizens by managing public resources and promoting the public good. Overall, the notion of new public service aligns leadership and management to the values associated with democratic governance. The concept of new public service is closely tied to ethics, so I want to shift now to this subject. Ethics may be defined as moral principles that guide or should guide human behavior. There's a lot to ethics, and we could spend considerable time discussing the topic. Ethics relates to honesty, fairness, making choices based on your conscience, and acting with responsibility. Sandy Smith and Shirley Feldman Jensen have worked tirelessly to identify ethical principles in my discipline of emergency management. They reiterate that these public servants must think ethically, act morally, obey the law, maximize the public good, respect the rights of people and organizations, fulfill duties to those being served, build trust, and use an ethical decision-making framework. Let me share a few of the key points they make in the Code of Ethics and Professional Standards of Conduct for Emergency Managers. I'll adapt these slightly so it's applicable to public administration in general. Smith and Feldman Jensen first assert that public administrators have a responsibility to the populations they serve. They must recognize diversity and serve without discrimination or preference. Another recommendation is to establish relationships with partners and operate within the law and regulations. Public servants must accurately represent their qualifications, and they should stay on top of research and cutting-edge practice standards. In addition, public servants must avoid abusive, harassing, or hostile relationships, and they must make sound decisions with public resources. A third recommendation is to recognize the interdependencies of the social, built, cyber, and natural environments. Smith and Feldman Jensen underscore the need for concerted efforts to protect the environment from harm. Smith and Feldman Jensen also underscore the need to work closely with their colleagues. Public servants support and assist those they work with, and they address unprofessional behavior if it is demonstrated by their coworkers. A fifth principle is to demonstrate responsibility to our employers. Public servants must take direction from leaders while also maintaining their professional standards. It's important to share relevant information with others so good decisions can be made. And public service professionals must recognize their behavior reflects positively or poorly on the organizations they work within. Being responsible to the profession is another key ethical principle. It's important that public servants advocate for their profession and promote progress in your profession, whether that is with existing or future employees. Another related principle is to model good behavior through words and actions. The final principle listed by Smith and Feldman Jensen is to be responsible to yourself. I think this is an interesting one. Public servants often focus on their duty to others, and they can neglect their own needs. If public servants do not learn, progress, or care for themselves, it is unlikely they will be able to perform their duties to assist others. I really like and appreciate this Code of Ethics and Professional Standards. I've provided a link here in case you would like further information about the great standards of conduct that have been identified and shared by Sandy Smith and Shirley Feldman Jensen. As you know, the history of humanity is filled with both model behavior as well as very disturbing actions against others. On the one hand, there are people like Mother Teresa who are constantly interested in the well-being of others. But there are other people whose behavior is appalling, and these actions must be avoided and corrected. One of those disconcerting cases was the death of George Floyd on May 25, 2020 in Minneapolis. During his arrest for using counterfeit money, George Floyd was restrained by a police officer who dug his knee into the neck of George Floyd. Floyd could not breathe and died as a result. This led to massive protests and riots throughout the United States and elsewhere. The death of George Floyd reiterated the need for increased respect to others in society. Those leading and managing private, public, and nonprofit organizations must be aware of and protect the rights and well-being of individuals and groups that work in the organization or are served by the organization. This includes people of a different race or ethnicity, those espousing a certain religion or faith tradition, others who are elderly or physically or mentally disabled, women, those who are pregnant, homosexuals, and others with diverse gender identities should also be protected. This brings up the acronym of JEDI, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Leaders and managers must do all they can to promote these important values. All people, in or outside of the organization, must be treated impartially and according to the law. Employees, citizens, and non-citizens must be treated fairly and with respect. In addition, there are many differences among individuals and groups, and these distinctions must be tolerated, valued, and even celebrated. Finally, everyone, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, or gender identity, should be welcomed to an organization and encouraged to participate to shape its direction and future. Leaders and managers should make justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion integral parts of how an organization is run. To conclude, leaders and managers of public organizations should be aware of the values of new public service. Public servants should understand ethics and demonstrate moral behavior in their organizations. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion are important values for organizations, and the application of these principles is likely to make an organization more effective in accomplishing its mission. I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best.